taking off on those initial steps into the ravine at Babi Yar. And I mean, what can be said about this place other than that this was the scene of one of the more frightful and dreadful massacres in recorded human history. And so recently, 1941. Talking 80 years. 80 years since, if memory serves, 33,147, was it? 33,000, was it? 33,000 plus Jewish people were ordered to gather on Melnikov Street. Well, I think 5 or 6 kilometres away, in we're 6 or 7 kilometres away from central Kiev. I couldn't bring myself to come here in December and January. It's especially macabre with the spectre of war looming large in the current day. Over the world rages war, earth, sea and sky wince at his roar. The cunt tramples down at every tread, 1 million men, women, children, 1 million dead. They say that we must crush the Hun, unless the world will be undone. But Huns are we as much as they, all men are Huns who fight and slay. And if we win and crush the Huns, in 20 years we'll fight their sons, who rise above that infamy, their fathers, their own ignominy. So over the world rages war, earth, sea and sky, winter is raw. He tramples down at every tread, 1 million fucking mammals dead. It's a bastard as war, but this was something more than war. You can see the monument there. This was more than war. 33,000 shot over the course of 2 days. This was extirpation, annihilation. The entire race just marched here and machine gunned. Boggles belief. Humanity could, homo homini lupus. Man is wolf to man. Perhaps it's not. Perhaps there's nothing surprising about it at all. Perhaps it's to be expected. What do you reckon, mate? Yes, the ravine. It's strange, but I mean, now this is obviously this section of the ravine is the sort of V shape, not quite the British V for victory, or the later V for vendetta. A victory over fascism always. This is more a V for 33,000 people shot all at once. They couldn't even do it all in the same day. Imagine that. Not the mechanical slaughter of the death counts, but just that number of humans herded into here. And let's face it, for the sake of historical accuracy, the Russian equation of the crude reductionism of, supposed Ukrainian Nazism and the Banderistas. Well, it's crude reductionism is the right term. It is a bastardization of the idea of Nazism, and even the story of Stepan Banderas from the 1940s is slightly skewed. The notion that Galicians or Banderistas, or basically in modern parlance Ukrainian edgelords using fascist symbols or even Nazi symbols, and that somehow makes them all the Azov battalion, it's nonsense. Or anti-Russian. They're certainly anti-Russian now. Violent conquest and bombardments, bombing raids will certainly do it. But it's more complicated issue because, well, back then there was a prevailing anti-Soviet, anti-Russian, and in the Soviet secret police, the force of repression, the NKVD, it was perceived that there were so many Jewish members and Jewish leaders of the NKVD, even Yagoda. And with the Holodomor, the terror famine that killed so many Ukrainians and so many Galicians, 4 to 10 million, it's hard to gauge the numbers, even historians struggle with it, but anywhere between 4 and 10 million people deliberately starved. And it wasn't like in European Russia and elsewhere in the Soviet Union. It's not just purely collectivization. I mean, they commandeered all the wheat and they actually guarded the old border with the Ukraine as it was, because Ukraine was not its own country, it was part of the Soviet Union, but they guarded the old border and the ports and requisitioned all of it. And I mean, there was cannibalism in the rural villages. It's just hideous stuff. It's a very complicated history, but the reductionism now, where they say that the Ukrainians, particularly the Western Galicians, are banderivtsas, and that means that they're Nazis. It's not the case, but it has to be said in 1941, it was the case for many, and it was actually the Ukrainian auxiliaries who were herding the Jews of Kiev into these ravines. And shooting them. Yeah. History is crazy. Yeah, it's entirely bizarre. But there's now an intersecting main road in between the two parts of the ravine and the disparate monuments. The Babi Yar monument we've just passed, and there's one just up ahead dedicated to all the Gypsies. A fucking park, it's a fucking park. It's gorgeous. George would have been happy, but a lot of Romani were slaughtered in the terrible massacres of Babi Yar. September 1941. Was it 27th, 28th of the 9th, 41? There's a monument to the children here, I believe. But yeah, it's strange. I mean, there were people shot all over this part, and stragglers and people panicking, and you know, strangely enough, a tiny minority of people who tried to scram, but because they weren't marched for many kilometres here, marching many miles, and yeah, the majority of them were herded peaceably enough into the main ravines, where a surprisingly small number of death squad shooters were present. And what's bizarre, though, the Einsatzgruppen Heydrichs, Reinhard Heydrich, the great monster of the 20th century, rivaling and perhaps even surpassing Stalin personally, because Heydrich got his hands dirty a lot more. Even though young Stalin was a bandit and a bank robber and whatnot in the Caucasus. But Heydrich, yeah, his hands are personally dirty, but I mean, he had his fingerprints are all over every bloodletting in Nazi history after 1931. Himmler's Hirn Heydrich. Himmler's brain is called Heydrich. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, maybe Hitler's... If Himmler's brain was Heydrich, then Hitler's sword was certainly Heydrich. He was the architect, the real architect, the real chief of the SS and the police state. Well, SS chief of Reich security and all. But his Einsatzgruppen, his death squad, which seem to take all the subsequent infamy for it due to that frog documentary ending up on Netflix. They're actually the Ordnungspolizei, the order police, were responsible for a lot of the shower by bullets, as they call it, the death by shootings, certainly in Poland. But here in Ukraine, as well as in Lithuania and Latvia, outside of Riga, and Lithuania, certainly in Kaunas and Vilnius, and Kiev, much the same. There were lots of local auxiliary forces who actually did the bulk of the shooting, and the SS Einsatzgruppen and essentially watched these local auxiliaries. The Ukrainians later staffed Treblinka and Sobibor, and they were called the Trauniki guards, or Hiwis, Hilfswillige, the local helpers. And in the Ukrainian case, they were considered Aryan. Perhaps in the Lithuanian and Latvian case too, but certainly less so. And even the Trauniki were viewed with disgust. But the SS apparently in Kaunas too, as the famous geezer in Kaunas who was playing the national anthem with an accordion and then bludgeoning Jews to death in the street while the SS watched and took pictures laughing. They couldn't believe the local support for such was the hatred of the Soviet Union and all Stalin's terror campaigns and the unparalleled democide of Stalinist Soviet Russia. Because it was the Soviet Union, but let's face it, Ukraine and everyone else were being trampled on by the ruler of Russia. Everywhere else was a vassal state. And yeah, they couldn't. It's unbelievable that Hitler didn't designate them honorary Aryans like he did the Japanese when he switched his allegiance from China to Japan, because there was so much understandable, I have to say, anti-Soviet feeling, and the Jews were lumped in with the NKVD. So for them it wasn't they control our economy. For them it was or the Jews came up with the Jews founded communism. Marx was a Jew, Trotsky's a Jew. The fact that Trotsky was a Jew was the reason that he couldn't, even though he masterminded the 1905 and the successful 1917 revolutions, he was just too Jewish to take the reins. That's why the, in my opinion, inferior Lenin was able to strongly arm his way back in power when Trotsky was essentially the spearhead of the second and the successful revolution. Anyway, yeah, it's the history is a minefield, and I don't wish to appear to be a clown stumbling through a minefield or trampling upon a giant grave, which essentially this is, with 33,000 Jewish people and gypsies and gays all shot in one sitting. I mean, it's just atrocious stuff. But it doesn't excuse the ridiculous. I mean, Russia's more fascistic than Ukraine is. Whatever corporate elements have gained power and prominence here, it is nonetheless a democracy that occasionally gets thwarted by the psychotic, as all democracies do. There are corporate monsters sat atop our puppet governments too. But to equate modern so-called banderistas with fascist is one thing, but Nazis, actual Nazis, I mean, behave your fucking selves. Sell that shit to the tourists. Do you know what I mean? And especially in Babi Yar, it's like the idea that current contemporaneous Ukraine is the kind of place where Jews would be led here en masse and machine gunned in the fucking ravine we just walked through. I mean, behave your fucking selves. Russia, on the other hand, there are campaigns of ethnic cleansing. It's crazy to me that Politkovskaya, the authoress of A Russian Diary, a wonderful journalist in the Orwellian sense, I mean, a student of George Orwell, a later successor, she was shot twice in the head after A Russian Diary was translated into English. So, obvious suicide. It's like a pariah suicide. All enemies of the cops, foes of the pigs, commit suicide with 2 fucking bullet holes, 2 in the dome. A Putin suicide. Yeah. It boggles the mind. It's mind-bending and melon-twisting, but the idea that the fascists are supposedly here? No, that's nonsense. That's sinister piffle. It's a perversion of language and logic. It's illogic, non-logic and nonsense. So I shall end my philosophical musings and sociological babblings in the gravesite of 33,000 Jews who were victims of genuine fascism and Nazism. And we should distinguish between the two, because, alright, Franco, the Spanish fascism was very Catholic, and fascism itself spawned from 2 millennia of Catholic or Christian Jewish hatred. But in Italy, I mean, you were better off a Jew under Mussolini than you were Pétain and Laval in Vichy, France, you know what I mean? Even in the unoccupied zone in France during World War II, the French cops were loading Jews on the trains, and the Dreyfus affair and the Vichy resistance to the British and the war that, England's last war with France obviously had to sink the French fleet. They were still being met by resistance and bullets up until 1942, when they were trying to get the Vichy-run colonies abroad to join the Allied war effort. So yeah, France, Paris should have been entered. We should have entered it as conquerors in 1944, not liberators of allies, and giving the French a seat at the post-war table, and then giving them nuclear weapons too. That most terrible of British inventions. Christ, we shouldn't have given that to the Yanks, let alone the fucking French frog, garlic munching turncoat scoundrels that they were. Can't believe I was recently considering the French Foreign Legion. My fucking hole. Anyway, I shall leave it there. Wisdom begins in wonder, and only fools are certain in these uncertain times of peril and madness. Alright, ciao for now. Fletch out. And actually, as a postscript, given the memorial here to execute Orthodox priests, there's something undeniably pressing in the sense of oppression, being oppressive, and maybe sinister about this particular ravine and the depth of it. I mean, obviously there's some artistic license with every film depiction of it was shown in the TV show Holocaust in the 70s, and also in various films and other telly shows, but I've got a feeling the point of the greatest depth of the ravine, this might be where the majority of people were. Obviously they're being led here from different directions. We're about half a mile away from the other ravine, but yeah, this might be where the bulk of, because even with ravines of this depth, there's a finite amount of space, even in a land that's full of ravines out of the city. Obviously Kiev has subsumed Babi Yar, or Babin Yar now, but back then this would have been out past the boondocks. I mean, you're out of the city here. There wouldn't have been roads intersecting it between here and the next part of the ravine. It would have just been a short hop, skip and a jump across grassland from one ravine to the next. But this might be it. And yeah, everything from Orthodox priests to gypsies, Jewish people, maybe homosexuals. I'm sure a lot of Soviet collaborators. Might not be best to call them collaborators, but well, NKVD collaborators. I'm sure to many Ukrainians, anyone helping the police machinery of the Soviet Union, I'm sure a lot of Ukrainians will have seen them as collaborators. Anyway, I'm sure only a tiny minority were deserving of their fate, and the rest of them were men, women and children would have just been herded wretchedly into ravines like this, machine gunned or shot with pistols or bludgeoned in the back of the head. Because even though it was auxiliaries that were largely doing the shooting here, there was a general directive approved from up on high by the mighty fucking Heydrich himself, Reinhard Heydrich. They said they had to spare their bullets for war. So even the so-called shower by bullet, a lot of it was shower by bludgeoning, back of the head. And I've been there. I know how easy it is to be wiped out with just a bludgeoning weapon. Well, in my case, I was lucky to wake up, just go through a little torture. But this is just a miserable way to go. Whether it's cultural, racial, religious, or a combination of all. That is a truly wretched way to go. Yeah, Babi Yar boggles the mind. Twist for melon massively. It's sobering being here. Homo homini lupus. Man is wolf to man. And these might be unnecessary addendums, but how to properly convey when you're in these ravines and walking along the woodland floor. And these hillsides would have been full of your countrymen in the, fuck religion and fuck tribe. We're all stupid, whichever shape, size, stripe and stench of theocratic belief you are, but nationally these would have been their countrymen. And the German men of the SS and interested Wehrmacht helpers, because Kiev had obviously fallen. The Führer called this the greatest victory in human history, which is a stretch. I mean, he probably shouldn't have reallocated some of the armour and kept it with Army Group Centre pushing on from Moscow, and then not branched off, for example, the Spanish fascist volunteers of La Legión de España, La División Azul, the Blue Division. And he sent them from the main Army Group Centre's thrust towards Moscow. He sent them up to Leningrad, but that's by the by. Just here in September. Actually, thinking about it, it started on September the 29th, didn't it? I got the date wrong. So it's 29th, and I think they still hadn't finished on the 30th. Shooting so many people at once. It boggles the mind. How can you be here and not consider the implications in hatred, in belief, in the extremity of belief, in sheer logistics? The whole thing just twists the fucking melon. And yeah, you've got walking. Just walking through these ravines. And the thing is, they could have easily, and did, spread it out from one ravine to the next, because, I mean, you can see the obvious ones where, like the one I just passed with the monument to the Orthodox priests who were slain. But also the sickening thing is in spacing it out in time, because they're human, right? The fucking trigger fingers are going to be getting sore. But it also creates a sound block, so I can see now why 32,500 people didn't scream and panic and resist when the initial 833,347 was it? Why the initial 800 people were shot, why another 32,500 people didn't. Because, look, it's just, they're ravines. They have hillsides. It creates sound blocks. Would have lessened the noise, and there's so much area around it. I imagine a lot of it, there was a lot more woodland. Now you can hear the sound of traffic from the roads, obviously. It having been subsumed by Kiev in the succeeding, or from now, in the preceding 82 years, 81 and a half. Yes, and war has returned to Kiev. It's spooky being here. It's undeniably spooky. Well, I should probably cease with these increasingly redundant or futile addendums. But what more can be said other than love is the answer rather than violence, unless we are actively committing violence against the violent. That's why I'm, no longer a pacifist, a pacific kind of chap, because fuck that, you know what I mean? Gandhi could say that shit when the crank fakir twat, when he's got the Japanese imperialists, the Shinto Buddhists who formed a devilish pact with the Japanese fascists and militarists. There's an interesting book about the Buddhists at war. And look at the Burmese Buddhists now. I mean, no fucking... Yeah. All experts are mammals and all mammals are flatulent. No fucking creed or theism is right. No theology. We're all cunts. Fucking human mammals. And look at this. Yeah, I imagine a few thousand people would have been shot at this particular juncture. So maybe it's not futile or redundant addendum. Yeah, Gandhi could say that shit about... He could comfortably spew about peaceful resistance, but without resistance to actual fascism of the like that saw 33,000 people herded into these ravines and shot in one go. One go. And that was just part of the wider shower by bullets, which killed 1 million, and the wider Holocaust, which was mainly mechanized. Places like, which also had, Ukrainian guards, I must say. But you can't equate the modern banderovцы with the Trauniki guards. You just can't. It's crude reductionism. Most of them are edgelords with symbolism because they hate Russian oppression, having been under the Russian jackboot so long. And a lot of them aren't even fascists, let alone Nazis or anti-Semites who'd love to recreate the massacre here at Babi Yar ravine. It's just fucking nonsense stuff. Sell that shit to the tourist homes. Sell that shit to the tourists. Boris and Ivan. Let's pop off at the Popovs. They're the fucking fascists these days. And it's not like, even the Ukrainian collaborators with the Nazis were trying to swap one form of tyranny for another, arguably a worse one. But they're all terrible. Gandhi could talk about peaceful resistance when he's got the Japanese fascists doing his dirty work for him. But you know what? Without resistance, the victories and triumphs of the evil are predetermined, and I don't want to live in a world where their triumph is predestined. We have to resist. So, yeah. Unironically, peace, love, unity, respect. Even though I came here to fight. And now I'm trying to join the British military to fight and resist totalitarian nihilism, because fucking hell, someone's got to. Even if it's the acid freak plur hippies of the world. Shit, other hippies aren't going to do it. And in the realm of general wokery, who the fuck will? So, yeah. Let's resist the malice of evil and not let the victories of the violent be predetermined. Always. Peace and love. From Babi fucking Yar.